Good morning, everybody. We're live at the Jungle, the Liger partners, talking about marketing. I'm Craig Slike. This is my first time here in the studio, first time hosting a podcast, so we'll see how it goes. And I have with me today a man who has his own kind of show on YouTube.
Yep.
Ed Bolian. Welcome, Ed.
Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome. Great setup.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's talk about first your background.
Sure.
Who is Ed Bolian?
I'd like to think that's more of a complex question than I could immediately answer, but I'm not sure it is. I'm a Atlanta born and bred car guy. I love all things driving, all things like the automobile, and have made a professional career of different things in and around cars, both in traditional methods and entrepreneurially. I started an exotic car rental company while I was a student at Georgia Tech and ran that for a while. Went on to be the director of sales at Lamborghini, Aston Martin, and McLaren Atlanta, and left that back in 2015 without really knowing what was next, just kind of looking for a different change of pace, let the attention span expire, and wound up starting an app with some friends called VinWiki. And we describe it as a social version of Carfax, or a crowdsourced vehicle history reporting platform. So it's kind of a very open-ended interface that anybody can post anything about any car they want to. And so we got about 330,000 users in there, which are mostly due to something we started about a year after we launched the app, which was a YouTube channel where me and my friends sit around and tell our best car stories. That's
fantastic. So the theme of my version of the Jungle is creativity. And not just creativity as in like drawing, painting, acting sort of thing, but the creativity that goes into starting your own business, the creativity of thinking of VinWiki, and then car stories, and then everything that comes after that. So, but you did leave out one very important fact.
What was that?
The Cannonball Run.
Oh, yes. So while I was working at the dealership in 2013, I kind of accomplished a 10-year goal of mine that I had set back in high school. And in 2013, I set the Cannonball Run record, driving from New York to LA in 28 hours, 50 minutes. So, that happened.
Observing all local laws, I'm sure.
In order to average 100.3 miles an hour for 2,811 miles.
But sadly, that's been...
It has, yeah. It was broken late last year in November, actually by a couple friends of mine, so all as friendly as it could be. But they actually met at my warehouse telling car stories. And so I knew that kind of building a social environment around the pursuit of Cannonball, which was kind of a new thing. Prior to my pursuit of it had been very much an insular idea that not that many people cared about, knew about, or wanted to try. And I got contacted by all these people that wanted to learn more, wanted to try it, wanted to do these things. And so we built this community of idiots that pursue it. And so it's been a lot of fun, but I suppose it's the reason that I lost the record as well. So.
Yeah.
And then it wouldn't have mattered because everybody lost the record in this COVID era. So
yes.
It took 6 years and dozens of extremely well-funded, well-qualified attempts to beat 2850, which was my time. And then in a span of 8 weeks, it was broken 9 times because there was nobody on the road.
That's crazy.
Yes.
So what is the current record?
So the current record is actually 25 hours and 39 minutes. So it looks like it's about a 3-hour advantage to drive across the country right now, just based on the traffic conditions.
Well, and they have the new route, right?
Yeah, it's a little easier now to go north. So we went down through St. Louis and across I-40. Now they go across 80 and then down from Denver to Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the original Cannonball route is still owned by you.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
The most traditional
Okay,
one.
now back to creativity.
Yep.
In order to do that, you had to get very creative in modifying your vehicle.
For sure. Yeah, so I mean, anytime you're looking at something entrepreneurial or you're looking at something like this big picture goal, essentially you can break down this hard to solve problems into the little bitty problems that you can digest. Taking it all at the same time is too overwhelming. It would never seem possible, but I've got to solve for minimizing police interaction, certainly, modifying the car, packing everything in, all the countermeasures, the fuel strategy, avoiding traffic and construction, avoiding bad weather. So there's all these little things that you have to do to increase your likelihood of success. And that's where I kind of found, that's one of the reasons I loved the challenge of Cannonball, was that the things that I felt I was hoping to be good at, or hoping to demonstrate that I was good at, in the logistical planning and the risk management and everything else, I knew I could make manifest in this challenge. And so it seemed kind of like something that I might be uniquely good at, and I really enjoyed solving the problem.
So you looked at it as a puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So like if you wanted to minimize your stops for gas,
Sure. Yep.
then you enlarged your gas tank.
Yes,
correct?
we added 2 additional 22-gallon fuel cells in the trunk. So we had 67 gallons. We could go about 850 miles without refueling. So we did the whole trip on 3 fuel stops.
Nice.
And then, of course, we also had countermeasures everywhere. So we had 3 radar detectors, 2 laser jammers, a police scanner, a CB radio, an ambulance traffic light changer, multiple GPS systems, tablets, power inverters, obviously the fuel system, high-power binoculars, everything you could want.
And what kind of car?
It was a 2004 Mercedes CL55 AMG.
Sleeper.
That's ideal. You think it's going to be Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but they're so uncomfortable. You never make good time driving on a road trip in one. So you want something that goes under the radar, both literally and figuratively, and is comfortable. It's got massaging seats, and it was a terrible, smelly place by the time we got to LA, but it was good.
Yeah, you had 3 men jammed in there and no
Yes.
back seat, right?
Yeah, so a co-driver and then a navigator, and yeah, fortunately the navigator was a lot smaller than I am, but it was a tight trip, but the adrenaline carries you, and yeah, we averaged 108 across the whole state of Ohio, 110 across Indiana, and we're averaging 117 across Illinois until we started to just consume so much oil that the car begged us to stop and add some more. Yep.
Now that experience led you to write a book.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that it mattered to me to have the story out there. To me, most of the things that we pursue professionally and recreationally, we sort of do it for the story that we'll have to tell. Burt Reynolds said that, in the end, all we have is our stories. And so I think that the chance to package it into something that could hopefully be entertaining and hopefully be motivating was important to me. And I wrote it kind of as a letter to my son, because I started writing it the day we got home from the hospital with him. My wife really wanted me to dispense with the Cannonball record before we had kids, and so the month after I set the record, we were pregnant. And so we gotten home from the hospital, and I started writing it, and I said, the finish line isn't the trophy. The blessing of Cannonball was having something to chase through my 20s, because this is a time where, as men, we're trying to figure out who we are and what we're good at and how we can define ourselves. And the privilege that I saw in achieving it wasn't really the accolade. It carried me through the darker times of adolescence, the ability to have this kind of back of mind goal that was always that thing to look forward to, that thing to chase, that thing to strive for. And so, my prayer for him was that, he could find his Cannonball. I hope it's not racing dangerously across the country, but if it is, we'll help him try to minimize the risks. But whatever it is that can possess you to make the best of yourself in chasing it is the greatest thing you could ever find.
So the best thing to come out of the Cannonball was the personal growth.
I think so, yeah. Just recognizing that in the catharsis of achieving it, it was the recognition that you had sort of, embodied the traits and the characteristics that you wanted to and that you knew it would require.
Very cool. So then, after the book, is when you started up VinWiki.
Correct. Yeah. So I left the dealership in 2015. I love cars. I love the transactional nature, the constant negotiation that selling exotic cars requires. It's like a business high every single day. But at the same time, there's no quality of life. There's no work-life balance. It was 70, 80-hour weeks because you just can't turn it off. I mean, people want cars at whimsical times. It's one of the reasons why that's one of the businesses that has just blown up during COVID, is that as everybody's at home, bored with their families, they want to start looking on the internet for cars, and they buy everything. And so,
wow, yeah.
like regular cars don't sell, but anything rare, cool, or interesting sells immediately. And so, you can never turn your phone off. Usher will call you in the middle of the night asking you what color this car is, and you just answer. And so it was one of those things that I loved, but I needed, as with a growing family, to have a little bit more balance. And so I left it without knowing what was next, which was a little bit daunting. But at the same time, I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, you've got to distance yourself from the immediate, in-your-face distractions that of whatever daily life is, in order to be able to creatively approach whatever problem you want to be able to solve. And VinWiki, the app, is based on a lot of the ways that I owned and sold cars previously. Because, the resources that are available, like Carfax and AutoCheck, vehicle history that exist in the world, it works pretty well in the median case, but fails in the outer edges of whatever the range is. So if a car is really, really cool or really, really nice, Carfax means nothing. And if it's an absolute piece of garbage, it means nothing. Because then whatever was done in the last 90 or 120 days is much more important than whether it was in an accident 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, and with a really special car, whatever's available there really doesn't matter. And so, like, my personal favorite car is a manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640. It's the big V12 car Lamborghini made from 2007 to 2009. And I sold several of them, but most of them, we thought about 95% of the cars had the new paddle shift transmission, which at the time was cutting edge, whatever, and now we hate them because they're unreliable, slow shifting, and it just diminishes the driving experience.
Yeah.
They're still cool cars, and plenty of people enjoy them, and I enjoy them as well. They're just not as good as a real stick. And so I was finding it harder and harder to find them, and so I started to make a list of all the VINs, and I figured out that where they thought there were about 300 of them, there were actually 29. And so I bought the nicest one that I could afford to finance with no money down, and using the credit that I built during the rental car company, and then started to document the VINs online. And in doing that, it doubled the values overnight.
Nice.
And so the empirical definition of rarity worked really, really well. And so I was able to sell that one and use the profit of the nicest one to buy the worst one ever. And it was a car that a drunk 15-year-old had crashed and abandoned in Canada with his girlfriend, who was then pregnant's father, who was a drug dealer who used the dealer's license to pack drugs with his 15-year-old shotgun son-in-law's help in the frame rails of cars to ship them from Canada into the U.S. And they had the car out one night because the feds or FBI of Canada, whatever that is, I'm sure they're on horses, but they were going to investigate the dealerships. They had to take this Lamborghini out, and the father-in-law got too drunk. The kid is driving it because he's 15 years old and also drunk, and he crashes it within a mile. And the reason the guy was in Canada was that he was a terrorist and had been banished from Iran for blowing up bazaars.
What?
Yes. And so they obviously file an insurance claim, which gets immediately denied. Everybody knows it was them. And so they bubblegum fix the car, ship it to Lebanon, and then they bring it. It doesn't sell there. It's like 2009. You can't sell anything in the U.S. The economy is terrible. So it doesn't sell in Lebanon either. It comes back into Texas with a bonded title, sells to a defense contractor in Vegas, and I buy it there, again, for less than I had just made on the other one. So it was my free Lamborghini.
Yes.
Yeah. It was pretty rough, but it was great.
But that story right there is an amazing story, and that's kind of why VinWiki exists.
Exactly. It has the worst Carfax you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
Every brand and alert that it could say, like, don't buy this car. But I love that car.
I think I've been in that car.
You have been in that car, yes. Yeah, I drove it every single day.
Was that the Batmobile?
It was, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, it was a Grigio Telesto one. And then a guy had to have it out of Portland, and he bought it. And at a considerable profit. And I bought a slightly nicer one for a little less than I then owned it for, and so it worked great. And that was it. Like, I used to make a list of all the VINs of all the cars I'd ever owned on my own website, so that when other people would buy them, they would Google their VINs and find me and tell me where they were. And so I found out that one of my Range Rovers got exported to Russia. One of the older Land Rovers got sold into Puerto Rico through an auction in Miami. The guy contacts me. He's like, how do I make this thing stop leaking oil? And I said, well, it'll stop when it's empty, like all Land Rovers will. And so I found out the first Gallardo Lamborghini that I had for the rental car company ended up in Hong Kong. And, it's always fascinating to see, because we're really good at understanding the perspective of when we own a car, okay it when it was owned previously, but zooming out to what happens afterwards, after you sell it, after you trade it in, after whatever happens, then you never know. And so building a place for that kind of information to become available was really the goal of VinWiki. And now, if a car is used in a movie or used in a crime or used in a child abduction, somebody posts it in 5 minutes. And so I can't wait to have the first person say, yeah, I was about to go buy this car off Facebook Marketplace, and then I checked VinWiki and it said that the dude abducted some kid in it. So I didn't go to his house and didn't die. Saving the world.
Not all heroes wear capes.
Some of them sit in front of microphones on the YouTube's internet.
And those car stories, if you will, on VinWiki led you to creating your Car Stories YouTube channel, which I've been on a couple times.
You have,
Was it
yes.
just once or twice?
I think 2 or 3. You got the ambulance overheating in the Alps, or the Andes.
Andes, yeah.
Yep.
I almost died in an ambulance in the Andes.
Yep.
And
The
jumping my
Mustang on the Chips Bridge.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, car stories to share later. So the idea was that a car story is the ideal post. So whatever happens that's interesting in a car, that's what we're trying to capture on VinWiki. And what I had noticed early on, whenever you start a tech company or an app or anything, any product that you need virality to, you think you're just going to put it out there in the world and everybody's going to tell their friends, because that's how you learned about Twitter and that's how you learned about Instagram. But what you don't understand is that was so far beyond the true critical mass of users for self-replication that no one anticipates the cost of user acquisition to get there. And so we launched this app that we really like, we think is useful, but at the same time, I can't tell the world about it because it costs money to do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any. And so I would let...
You would pay a company like us to do
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Liger.
Yeah.
And
well, it didn't exist at the time.
Right. It hadn't been bred yet. But the...
who's still a male lion and a female tiger at the time.
It's, yes. Yeah, with growth limited in genes that are no longer present.
Exactly.
Yep. So I didn't know what to do. I would let other YouTubers that I knew borrow my cars, kind of do car reviews and mention VinWiki, and we would see a great spike in users. I mean, back then, if we got 50 users a day, it was great. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, I know that our people are on YouTube. We can get users from YouTube automotive channels. And so my thought was, well, I'll make content and just give it to other auto YouTubers, and maybe they'll let it run on their channel. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the audience myself. I just want to get people to download my app. And they all said no, because even if you give someone well-produced content that all they have to do is press upload and release, there's this fear in any kind of social media following that if you change or you do anything different, that they'll all just go away. And there is some validity to that, and then there's some that's just kind of manufactured and kind of built into the analytics to make sure that people continue to do what the platforms want you to, which is keep making the same content. And so I was like, well, darn it, we have all this. We shot the first 25 videos in a day in my warehouse. I just had a bunch of friends over, we got some pizza and beer and set up some cameras and just started telling car stories.
That's awesome.
And so I'm like, well, I don't know I guess we'll just put them out on our channel. And a buddy of mine from church had actually said that he would, kind of shoot and edit them for me. So I knew nothing about this other than holding a, phone up and yelling at it. And so he did a tremendous job with it. And we kind of agreed, all right, well, we're doing 25 of these things. We're going to release them every weekday, so a month. If we get more than 50,000 total views, then we'll do some more. And it ended up getting 800,000 views. And
nice.
There were a few really, kind of high points. One of them was a friend of mine talking about what it was actually like to maintain his McLaren F1, which is the most valuable modern car. And that was our first video, and it did well. It's now got about 2 million views.
Doesn't it take like $60,000 a year to maintain?
Oh,
McLaren?
absolutely. Yeah, everything just ages out like a race car. So the fuel cells, the bladders, and everything, and the tires are insane. And they tried to make him rent a racetrack and hire a race car driver to balance the tires by feel, which
I can feel them. They're good.
I can say a lot of things with a straight face, but I want to meet the guy that said that. Like that's pretty impressive. So there was also a story about a time that I bought a Lamborghini from a local prostitute that did well. My wife bought a Ferrari from a rapper it was given to him as a birthday gift from T-Pain, and his parents had jumped it backwards and fried all the electronics, and I didn't have any money, but it was a great deal, and so I convinced my wife of a few months that it was the best thing that she should do with her life savings to buy this $30,000 Ferrari, and yeah, that earned me a lot of favors with the in-laws, but it was just one of those things that ended up working out, made a little bit of money flipping it, and got a good story to tell.
Nice. Yeah. So you've name dropped T-Pain and Usher, so you still have their numbers, right? So you can send them to me.
They'll be the next guest on the
show.
Liger, the jungle.
That sounds great. So now car stories. This is where I haven't talked to you in a while. You've started something called Car Track, right?
Yes. Yeah. So collaborations are, as you just mentioned, one of the biggest things to grow any kind of audience. The more that you interact with other people that have some form of social media audience or actual celebrity fame, then it works really, really well to grow things. And so that's one of the best things about the VinWiki channel is that we get content creators that ask to come on our channel all the time so that they can share their best car stories. They may have a daily vlog, they may show their whole life to the world, but there's always the high points. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think anybody's interesting enough that we need to hear everything about their life every single day. Yeah. I certainly am not. So that's what I love about the content strategy is that it doesn't need to be me. In fact, now I probably only tell a story every 3 or 4 weeks, but at the same time, there's something interesting on there every single day. Today's is a guy who resurrected a boombox trailer that was a promotional tool for a radio station in Indiana, and he found it because this guy's Reddit post had it in the background, and he'd always wanted one, and he used Google satellite to track it down to where it was, and it was at a karate studio, and he had to buy it.
He used Google satellite to nail it down, to find it.
To find neighboring businesses to ask who to buy it.
Wow.
Yeah, and of course nobody knew who owned it, so he bought it out of the backyard and had to get a bonded title and all this stuff. So those kind of adventure car search stories are perfect because you never really know what the full story is when you see something interesting parked in a parking lot or driving along the road. And so capturing those has always been the thing. But in collaborating with other YouTubers, opportunities come up, different things that we could do. And a guy that has about 1.5 million followers was over telling some stories, and we were sitting around my fire afterwards just talking, and I said, have you ever thought about doing like a Top Gear cheap car challenge? And he's like, we couldn't do that. I'm like, why not? We do that every day. We buy the worst examples of the coolest cars on earth, and we try to not die in them. Like that is Top Gear. That's why we do it, is because we grew up loving the greatest show that was ever created. And
it's a great show.
I mean, it was the Super Bowl of viewership every week.
Yeah.
And so, the most successful television program of all time. But they haven't been able to recreate the magic of it with the subsequent hosts.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Clarkson punches people in the face. They can't do that anymore, and they probably should have just let him. Let's be honest. But there's things you get away with. Now, and Amazon spent an insane amount of money bringing them all over for the Grand Tour. But then they realized that it only makes sense from Amazon Prime's membership perspective the first time. After that, everybody already signed up, so they were seeing almost no marginal gain to keep making the series. So after 3 years, they're like, we're just going to do the occasional specials. We know you're under contract to keep doing stuff with us, but we're not going to pay $3 million an episode to keep making this stuff. And so I'm talking to this guy. I'm like, look, we'll just find another friend. We'll set up some challenge that is just based on what cars we want to buy this week, and we'll go out and do it. And so we got a sponsor to kind of help support it and help with the production effort. And we decided, since the most current thing at the time in terms of automotive news was the release of the new C8 Corvette, the mid-engine Corvette that everybody had been anticipating, we would just decide what the coolest car we could buy for the same price as that, which was like a $59,000 base price. And we'd meet somewhere, and we all had to be, the three of us were going to be judging a class at the Amelia Island Concours, so it made a perfect sense as a finish line. And magically, that happened to be the week before the world shut down. And so we literally finished filming it and then all had to be home for forever, which was also serendipitous because we were all having children. And so I had a daughter born. My wife actually went into labor while we were at Amelia Island. And so we had to kind of speed things up because I'm 400 miles from home and I'm going to have to drive really fast. And so fortunately it stopped.
Luckily you had a good car to do it in,
That's
right?
it. Yeah. That's it. And because my gifting, if there's anything, is taking people to the hospital when their wives are having babies.
Yes, for our viewership, Ed drops that because Ed was the guy who drove me to the hospital when my wife went into labor, and I needed a ride in the record-breaking car.
Yes,
the record-breaking Cannonball car. And I said, "Hey Ed, can you get me there fast?" He's like, "Yes, I can."
I have a special set of skills, Craig.
It was, and actually we're pretty close to it. It was like a half-hour drive normally. We got there in about 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. That was good times. But it's all it's been an awesome journey. And so we shot that one. It did well. It got about 13 million views. That first series. We just finished our second one. So that was in the first one. We bought a Ferrari 360 Spider, which is kind of a traditional great option, about $60,000. The other guy bought an Aston Martin V12 Vantage S
for $60,000.
For $69,000, he stretched the budget a little bit. He claimed that his C8 would have had options on it, and I bought a 2006 Lamborghini Gallardo Spider with a manual transmission, which would normally be about $120,000, but mine was in a Santa Monica mudslide flood, and so it was in terrible condition. Had a branded title, and was the most fun I could have possibly had.
That's awesome.
That's it. So the latest premise was that we had to find the most depreciated supercars that we could. And so we just wrapped that. We shot it out in Vegas and just got home. So it was a spoiler. It's an Aston Martin Vanquish, a Maserati Coupe GT, and a Mercedes CL65 AMG. And all of them were about 90% depreciated from their original MSRP.
Wow. And were they all falling apart?
The CL was pretty solid. The Maserati was an absolute piece of garbage. It was a manual transmission car, which is quite rare and cool, but I actually found the car for the guy because he couldn't find a manual one that he really wanted, and so I found him one, and I was like, it sounds pretty bad. It had 120-something thousand miles on it. Absolute piece of garbage. But it broke in very entertaining ways the entire time, which is kind of what you want for a production like this.
Yeah, just like Top Gear. Yeah.
Exactly. So I ended up with a 2003 Aston Martin Vanquish that had spent the last 7 years in Colombia. And not South Carolina or the district. But I had a buddy's drug dog sniff around it. He said I was in the clear, but he said, we need to take all the panels out to be sure. And I was like, well, let's just not worry about that. So it was a fantastic car. It ran on half the motor most of the time, and it didn't like the heat, which was a problem.
The heat. So you were out in the desert in Nevada, California during the hottest heat wave ever.
On Earth.
Since we've been tracking
the
temperatures.
Weather. Yes. So the hottest day ever recorded on the planet, we were about 20 miles from there. So it was just over 130 there. It was, I think the highest I saw was 124. But I was in an Aston Martin without working air conditioning. So it was a pretty awesome experience.
How did you survive?
We were drinking about 15 bottles of water a day.
Good.
Kind of constantly. Yeah. And I don't know. It's one of those things that you look back to like, man, that was probably riskier than I thought it was.
But it's a dry heat.
Yeah, which is not a thing. It's still heat.
It's still heat, but I find that it's more tolerable when it's less humid until a certain point.
True.
Until it's just burning you from the outside in.
Right, and there's no escape from it except sitting in the Mercedes, which has fully functional air conditioning and air-conditioned seats even. Yeah.
Ah, that
Yeah.
must have been nice.
It was, but he didn't bring that was the criticism, is like, yes, it's a fantastic car and it's faster than all the other ones, being an AMG car, but it's the reason I used one for Cannonball is that it's so subtle. Like, it's not a supercar. It was very depreciated, but it was, so I feel he cheated. But I'm over it. It's not a big deal.
Did you ask him, hey, you want to like switch for the next 12 hours?
That would not have worked. And the Maserati only had one window, so he was exposed to it the whole time, even with his marginally functional air conditioning.
So these are terrible cars.
They are, but that's what VinWiki, that's what car stories are all about. Like, nobody wants to hear about the time that you rented a Camry and drove across Death Valley. They want to hear about the time that you almost died in an Aston Martin. Like, that's way better because it was so terrible. And
well, if you switch out Aston Martin with 79 Dodge Camper, that would be like my summer trips with my family throughout my childhood.
There you go. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That sounds lovely. Probably doesn't slide as well through a dry lake bed, though.
No. That must have been fun.
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, we found this dry lake bed that was wide open, and they're not like when you think it's going to be just like perfectly smooth. You can go as fast as you want. No, it's like the bumpiest thing in the world, but you can still just do whatever you want because there's no friction, so you won't flip a car. So you can just. So we had this like drag race where we go down and like have to like slide around this turn and come back, and I just sent it and spun as hard as you possibly can into a cloud of my own dust and smoke, which all came in the car because obviously the windows are down because the air conditioning doesn't work. So we looked pretty disheveled at the end of this, but I hope it'll make for good television. It's one of those things that it's definitely the most fun I've ever had doing anything that could ever be construed as work. And so like, we're all like, how do we do more of this? Because I don't care if it makes money at all. It doesn't make a whole lot, but it's a whole lot of fun because we're overproducing for YouTube and we have like a real film crew and stuff because we can't capture it ourselves. And so it's overkill for what we're using it for, but that's just because it's so much fun.
But you can gather all that footage, have it on YouTube, but then you can also sell that.
Yes.
And so if Netflix is listening, you
There's
might
something out
be
there.
interested in a deal, get it on Netflix.
For sure.
And so that's what's so interesting to me is your creativity is fed by your passion, which leads to your business.
I'd like to think so. I mean, it's one of these things that I don't know why any of it worked. And I had a kid from Georgia Tech call me the other day asking if he could ask some questions. And, they always ask, like, what would you tell your, 10-year ago self to change or do differently? And I told him, if in the moment of being a college entrepreneur and all the hardships and all the things that went so badly in the rental car company in the early days of selling cars and learning what I was doing, like, I would have changed it all. Because a lot of the outcomes certainly could have been a whole lot better. But 10 years removed from it, 15 years removed from it, with the hindsight opportunity to look at it, I realized that if those specific things hadn't gone as badly as they did, the lessons I learned, the circumstances, the outcomes that eventually came from it never would have happened. And so being happy with how things have gone lately, I'm very grateful that things didn't go any better. And so it's all about perspective, but it's mostly in the ways that you're willing to look at hardships, the ways you're able to look at shortcomings and know that all right, that was a tough lump to take, but it's going to be useful someday. And maybe I do wish that somebody didn't crash my Lamborghini and abandon it the week before my wedding and sell my Ferrari to somebody without knowing anything other than his name was Lucky. But, these things happen. They become good stories. They become great lessons, and you move on, and, things get better.
That's fantastic. Well, Ed, we've taken up a lot of your time, but thank you so much for coming down here. Can you tell us how we can find you?
Sure. So the YouTube channel is called VinWiki, VinWiki. I'm at Ed Bolian on pretty much everything else, and pretty easy to find.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming down, Ed.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is our episode. First one of the jungle.
There you go.
All right.
It's all downhill from here.
True.